Bio. We're continuing on with chapter 16. The title of this section is Evolution as Genetic Change. So again, this is going to be more focused on the specifics of how evolution affects the genetics of organisms and how the change in genes can lead to changes in populations over time. So our first thing is just kind of some review from chapter 15, saying that natural selection affects which individuals survive and reproduce and which do not. So remember, natural selection is survival of the fittest, so that process is going to determine which organisms survive and reproduce and then which just die off. And so if an individual dies without reproducing, it does not contribute its alleles to the population's gene pool. And that just makes sense. So if we have a bunch of black lizards and then all of a sudden a gray one shows up and that gray one dies without reproducing, its gene pool or its genes will not be contributed, and therefore we'll have fewer gray lizard, or the possibility of fewer gray lizards. And if an individual produces many offspring, its alleles will stay in the gene pool and may increase in frequency. So what that means is if we have a bunch of really tall people, or really, let's say just a bunch of really big lizards, they're just bigger than the average lizard, then they're going to be stronger, they're going to be able to reproduce more easily, they're going to be able to fight off their competitors, and so therefore the allele for being big in size will stay in the population, and then it will increase in frequency. So there'll be more alleles for big lizards if they're the ones that are mainly reproducing. And so evolution, again, remember, is defined as any change over time and the relative frequency of alleles in a population. So that evolution of those more big lizards reproducing, that means that more lizards, or that the lizard population in general will become larger, and therefore evolution will occur. And then this next line is one of the most important lines that you're going to need to know, is that populations, kind of messed it up there. Populations, not individual organisms, can evolve over time. So what that means, remember Lamarck tried to say that crab just grew a big claw over the course of his lifetime. That's not what happens. It's not an individual organism that changes. It's the population as a whole that changes over time. It evolves over time, because eventually what really happened was there was a gene for the larger claw, just kind of kept mutating, kept getting added in, because the larger clawed crabs are reproducing, and therefore that is why they have such a large claw today. So that is, again, a really important thing you need to know, is that populations, not individual organisms, can evolve over time. And so now we're going to look at natural selection, again, kind of the focus today, on single gene traits. So how can natural selection affect a single gene trait? So it acts on single gene traits and can lead changes in allele frequencies and thus to evolution. So natural selection, again, just kind of going back to what we're saying, that the big lizard gene can change the allele frequency if the big lizards are just more fit, they're stronger, they're able to survive better, so they're going to pass their genes on. And so then they're going to give an example that organisms of one color instead of size now may produce fewer offspring than organisms of other colors. So their example being that a lizard population is normally brown. So our base population is brown. But there are some mutations that produce red and black forms. So this normally brown population has a couple mutations, and now we have some red and black forms that just appear in low numbers in the population. And so the first thing is that red lizards, they're more visible to predators, so they will be less likely to survive and reproduce. So if you're born red, it's going to be harder for you to survive. You're going to stick out more. The predators are going to see you, so therefore you're going to be the one that gets eaten. So therefore our allele for red color will become very rare. So our red allele will kind of die off pretty quickly. However, black lizards, so if you have the mutation to be black instead of brown, you can warm up faster on cold days, because black kind of collects or conducts heat better than brown. So thus, it'll give them the energy to avoid predators. So they're going to be faster, they're going to be able to move, and they're going to be able to kind of escape the predators. So since they're escaping the predator so often, they're going to survive more and they're going to produce more offspring. And since they produce more offspring, the allele for black color will increase in its relative frequency. So the black lizards will start to thrive. So we can look here, this chart kind of explains it really well, that our initial population, again, most of them are brown. So we had 80, 10, and 10. And then we said the red lizards stick out, so they die off really quickly. And so then in our next generation, we have Still, we have a majority brown, but now we have 20% black because, you know, they can warm up faster, they're reproducing more, and then it just kind of keeps increasing from there. We go from 70-30, then we get a complete switch from 40-60. So the evolution, the population has changed over time to where we now have more black lizards than brown lizards. And so that is how it can work just on a single trait, or a single gene trait. So this is effective color mutation, so it's controlled by a single gene. So now we're going to look at how natural selection can affect our polygenic traits. So those are our traits that are controlled by many genes. And there's 3 different ways that this can happen. So all 3 of these are really important that you're going to need to know, is that it can affect our distribution of phenotypes in any of 3 ways. So we have directional selection, stabilizing selection, and disruptive selection. So hopefully we've seen all these at some point before. We've kind of had you define these words at the beginning of the chapter, had you look at them in the crossword. So now we're going to get into what they actually are. So directional selection occurs when individuals at one end of the curve have higher fitness than individuals in the middle or at the other end of the curve. And so we'll see a picture and this will make more sense. And then our range of our phenotypes will shift as some individuals survive and reproduce while others do not. And so when we talk about this curve right here, remember we said that normal populations are represented by a bell curve, and so now we're going to look at how the normal bell curve changes. So in the example of directional selection, birds with larger beaks have higher fitness, therefore our average beak size increases. So if you look, this dotted line is always going to be our original population. So our original population had normal beak size, then all of a sudden let's say the food source changed, and now it's more beneficial to have a larger beak, so therefore the average size is just going to shift to the right. So now it's more beneficial to have a larger beak, so the average just changes. So that's directional selection. It just changes its direction a little bit. And so in stabilizing selection, that's when individuals near the center of the curve have higher fitness than individuals at either end of the curve. And so this keeps the center of the curve at its current position, but it narrows our overall graph. So remember, our normal is a bell curve. So right here, we can see our dotted line is our normal bell curve. And the example they give is that human babies that are born at an average mass are more likely to survive than babies that are born either much smaller or much larger than average. So again, usually we have traits, it's pretty spread out. However, if you're a baby that's born too small or a baby that's born too big, you're less likely to survive. So therefore, most of our babies are born in this middle range. So it's just over time that has just been more advantageous. So that's been the genes that have been passed on, are babies that are born at a average weight. So that is stabilizing selection. It kind of pushes everything in and it stabilizes it. So for our last type, it is disruptive selection. So this is when individuals at the upper and lower ends of the curve have higher fitness than individuals near the middle. So that's disruptive selection takes place. So if the pressure of natural selection is strong enough and long enough, this curve will split in half, creating 2 distinct phenotypes. So the example we give here is, again, we have our normal curve right here in the middle, and if average size seeds become scarce, so these birds in the middle and our dotted line, they just usually ate average size seeds. So let's say all of a sudden the trees that produce average size seeds got a virus, they're all gone. So one that eats small seeds now and one that eats large seeds are going to be the ones that will benefit. So we'll have 2 groups. So if you look now, we have right here, we have a big jump in our new population. So these are ones that eat small seeds. Again, we don't have very many average size seeds, so that group dips. And then now we have a bunch of large seeds, so the ones with larger beaks are going to prosper as well. And then over time, if the average size seeds go away completely, then we'll have 2 complete different phenotypes. So that is it for the first part of that section. Let me know if you have any questions.